It's looking pretty miserable out there today, so I'm really glad that I'm in the studio, and today I'm going to take you through how I made my track All I Want. It's brand new, it's out on Plastik People now on the awesome Garage House Volume 3 compilation. Some amazing tracks on it, I definitely recommend you check that out. And today I'm going to take you through how I made my track All I Want. So let's jump into Ableton and dissect it all. So I know you guys love it when I tear apart my tracks and show you exactly how I made them, and that's what I'm going to do to my latest release, my new track called All I Want. It's out now on Plastik People. I'm going to put a link up there and also a link in the description, so if you want to help support, I'd really appreciate that. Also, check out the compilation that it's on. It's on the Garage House Volume 3 compilation. It's an amazing compilation. If you like that sound, definitely check the compilation out. So let's jump into this project, and I'm going to show you exactly how I made it. I'm going to tear apart every single layer and show you how I kind of put it together. So let's jump into Ableton and I'll show you that now. So we're into the project now, and I was trying to think of how I actually started this project. I have a whole load of different ways that I will start a track. Now that might be a melody idea I come up with, or it might be a sample of some sort that I found, maybe a vocal sample or a stab or something like that, something that triggers some kind of idea. And I think in this case I was actually just playing around with the melody. So I had a new plugin at that point. I think it was just when I first started using a new plugin called Velvet. So this has been out for a little while, but I only just kind of discovered it. And I did a video a little while back on Velvet and how I've been using it. I'll link that up the top as well so you can see that. But basically I started off with the Rhodes piano. So we can see here we've got this Rhodes channel here, and I'm actually using this Velvet instrument on here. Now this is a sampled Rhodes, but it has a really nice sound to it, and I'm actually using the Mark II Rhodes for this, a little preset called Cabinet Tremolo. So that has a really nice sound that comes out of it, and I'm not a great piano keyboard player, so I find it really kind of hard to construct chords when I'm playing them in via a keyboard. I will do single notes, so I'll kind of get some ideas with single notes, but when it comes to chords, I don't know, I've got sausage fingers, so I sometimes find that a little tricky to kind of do that kind of stuff. I've never been a keyboard player, so what I tend to do is I use the chord device within Ableton. I'm a massive fan of the chord device. Now with this chord, I don't even know where I found this chord from. It might have been from a YouTube video, maybe a tutorial, or it might have been a MIDI device that I originally saw, or a MIDI instrument of some sort. I'm not quite sure where I got it from. It probably was a YouTube video, and what I do is I kind of look for chords and then program them into this chord device. I'll probably do a video on that at some point showing you how I do that. But with this chord, we've got the original root note, and then we got these 4 additional notes within there, and it creates a really lovely chord. So if I solo that, you can see how that sounds. Now you see I've also got some automation straight away on this, so I wanted to kind of have that kind of striking, kind of strong sound of the Rhodes, but then this kind of soft, subtle sound of the Rhodes at certain points. So I was kind of going between the two, so I had something to kind of, so it doesn't sound so static all the time. I wanted to kind of go between the subtle and then the more expressive, stronger Rhodes sound. Now you can do this with Velvet because Velvet works with velocities. So the stronger you hit the key, the louder the noise is, and the more kind of bright the sound is of the Rhodes. So what I thought I'd do is I'd actually automate the velocity. So I did that with MIDI effect rack. So you can see within here I've got a macro that is actually done to the velocity device. So I put a velocity device in here which is actually controlling the velocity that is going into the Velvet. So I've got this macro here that is controlling both the out high and the out low. So the out high, I don't want to go into this too much because obviously you can actually explore this device completely, but the out high and low kind of show what kind of range of velocity you want to go into that device, and by kind of putting them both to the same amount, that is kind of saying, okay, I want it to be that velocity. So that's why I've got that macro that is doing that rather than just individually kind of automating those two controls. Just makes it a little bit easier. So that's why I've got that kind of velocity in there. And we can see here that the velocity kind of starts about 50% there, goes up to about 98, well actually it goes over 100%, so I'm not actually even sure what that means. I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, I'm taking the velocity right down so it's kind of really subtle and soft, and then it gradually gets brighter. So you can hear how that sounds in the first part of the track. So you can hear you can see the velocity going up here. So I'm just playing with the velocity to kind of make it soft and then hard, just create that contrast really, make it so it doesn't sound so boring. Now note-wise, I have these kind of held notes in the kind of breakdowns that kind of create a smoother kind of feel to it, and then throughout the rest of the track I've got these more stabby notes. So it's pretty much the same notes, there's just more of them basically. It just kind of creates more of the movement. So I've got that within there, and I say this is the root note that I'm using here. So it goes A, C, and then B, but I've got this kind of chord device that's actually creating that chord. So without that, it would sound pretty bad. Yeah, it doesn't sound good, but with the chord device, yeah, it sounds really nice. And then we've got the EQ. I've used an EQ8 there. Not used any third-party EQ on this, which I could have done, but I put the EQ8 on there, just cutting the bottom end out, putting a little brightness in there. Got a bit of reverb as well. The actual the Velvet device itself, the Velvet plugin, has its own reverb, but I like kind of controlling it separately. Sometimes it can have a nice effect, but I tend to like using the Ableton reverb on its own. So I've got that reverb there. It's just a little bit of reverb on there. Again, I've got reverb on the channel, not on a send channel. I've gone over this in previous videos. It's just one of those things that I do. So I got that within there. I've got the LFO tool, which I've gone over again in pretty much every one of my videos. It's a side chaining tool, which I use all the time. I really love it. And that's just kind of ducking it to give it a bit more of it goes along with the beat a bit more. It kind of merges it in with it a bit more. Then next up we have the auto filter. I'm using this to kind of take out some of the bottom end. So in that first part, it kind of scoops out that bottom end. So I just use it to kind of take away some of those low frequencies at the end of breakdowns and things like that, just so that when it comes back in again, it's got more power, it's got more weight behind it, and that's kind of how I do those Rhodes. And I've got a utility on there on the end there, just because I like to automate the volume of the track. So I've probably kind of ducked it down at a certain point in the track, maybe towards the end, fading it out perhaps. Nothing really major there. Next up, we have the M1. So we've got this kind of backing up that Velvet. So again, we've got the same notes within here, the same held notes within here, the same chord device as well. The M1 patch that I'm using is Dynastrings, so it's a string patch within here. I wanted to kind of create a really nice, rich, warm pad from that. We've got a bit of EQ, taking the bottom end out, giving a bit of brightness on the top end. Again, the LFO tool, just doing a bit of side chaining on there to kind of give it a bit of movement. And then we got an auto filter scooping out the top end and the bottom end. So two different ones there. That's kind of introducing it, and that's kind of taking it away almost. So you're taking the top end out and then you kind of bringing it back in again. Same with the low end. And then I got a utility on the end there. Nothing really amazing about that, but this kind of happens in the breakdown. So we can see we got the first kind of part of the track, the intro where it comes in, and then then there's the breakdown midway through, and then the breakdown towards the end is this kind of much bigger one. Again, we're just kind of automating the auto filter to kind of take out the bottom end and the top end and things like that. So just kind of evolve it over time. Nothing much else went into that one. Now, next up we have the bass, and I've actually got two different layers of bass here. So the bottom end of bass is this kind of one that I'm using from Bass Engine. So Bass Engine is another sampled bass instrument. This one is kind of made for hip hop bass, but I just kind of like it. It's got a real kind of raw kind of feel. It works well with my kind of sound. It has that kind of, a lot of the basses have this kind of rough and noisy kind of sound to them. They're not perfect, and I think that's what I kind of like about them. So we've got this bass instrument in here. So if I play this back, it's this really kind of gruff kind of bass. I really quite like that. But as I say, that's just one layer of the bass, and I've got another one underneath it as well. Okay, so that's just literally one hit. So at the end, pretty much midway through, or towards the end of the first bar, we've just got one hit there. I think, yeah, again, that's from the Bass Engine. So this is it's an 808. Basically, it's an 808 kind of punch. So we got like they're kind of almost talking to each other. These two basses are kind of a call and response almost. So it's kind of just marrying them two up, just kind of going between them. You can kind of see how we've got the first bass here, then the second bass, and then the first bass again. So let's hear how they sound together. So it's just kind of create that interesting aspect to the bass. So it's not just the same bass going throughout. It's just kind of got that punch in there. I can't really describe how or why I kind of did this. I think I just wanted a bit more of a punch in there, probably just to kind of give it a bit of variation. Usually when I'm kind of making my tracks, I'll put like a double kick somewhere in there towards the end of the bar or the start of the bar or somewhere through the bar, just to kind of create that interesting kind of punch. So you've not just got a 4/4 kind of drum. And I think with this, I kind of used an 808 instead, just to kind of create that same kind of punch. So that's how that bass is kind of used. And I've actually put all of these elements as a music group. So there's all kind of, yeah, I don't know how have I done that? I wonder why I've done that. Oh, that's right. So I've got a bit of compression going on here, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But the ozone that's on here is kind of taking the bottom end, making it very mono, and then we have the top end that's kind of being made a little bit more wide. So all the instruments within here, the Rhodes, the pads, and the two basses, I want to make very mono on the bottom end. So I want to make sure that they're completely mono. The reason for that is because we don't want the bass frequencies causing too much muddiness. And on the top end, I kind of want just a little bit more kind of width. So those are the musical kind of elements, and that's kind of pretty much how I started. I probably started with the kick, just a kick, and those musical instruments. So let's hear how that sounds all together. It's a very kind of flat kick going on there. I really kind of like that one. Just a kick, got a bit of EQ on there. I don't think anything amazing. Probably, yeah, just scooping a bit of the bottom end out, a little bit of the top end out. I'm using Neutron here because I tend to use Neutron where I have to be very precise on the bottom end. I don't know why, but I just kind of like using the Neutron EQ on things like the bass and the kick drum and things like that, where I need to be really precise. Yeah, as I say, I've got no rules. I don't have this is when people ask me questions about how do you do this, it can change depending on what the track is. I kind of just go with what I'm feeling. And at that point, you know, on the Rhodes, for example, I just use the normal Ableton EQ. It is still a really, really good EQ. Just because it comes with Ableton doesn't mean that it's not good. It's actually a very, very good EQ. Just occasionally I'll use the Neutron EQ when I want to do something special, or maybe I just feel like it for some reason. So that is the kick. Let's move on to the drums. And I've gone over the drums. The drums are I kind of do my thing with the drums, and the way I kind of build drums is usually from using top loops. Again, this is going to be a video that I will go on to at some point and show you how I use top loops. And what I'll do is I'll take those top loops and I'll cut bits out of them. So that's what I'll show you in this, because that's kind of how I built up the drums for this track. So I'll get a loop here. Let me just get this loop going here, and you can hear how I built these up. So I'm actually going to solo the kick and the drums group. So the drums group is pretty much all the top stuff. So we've got all the different layers there. Let's go into the hi-hat first. So I've got this hi-hat within here. So I have just a simple hi-hat one shot there. Now, I've done this because I wanted to get a bit of skippiness into it. And usually when you want to get the skippiness, the swing into it, I like being able to control that via MIDI so that I can use that same swing across the rest of the track. So I've got this hi-hat going here. I've got it on the offbeat. I usually always start with the offbeat first, and then I'll put some tiny little kind of smaller notes in there, and these are the ones that are going to be really skippy. Now the thing that gives it its skippiness is the groove. And this one I'm using the Swing 16 at 70%, the MPC one. I tend to use the MPC ones quite a bit because, well, I just like how they sound. This has got quite a bit more swing than I'd normally have, so if you're going for more of a club record, I'd probably take that swing down. I'd probably have it around about 60-ish, 65 maybe. 70 really makes it a more swingy kind of track. So that's what I've got set up with this one. I've got it on Swing 70%, and this kind of gives it a bit of a shuffle. You'll see that also those kind of smaller notes have also got less velocity. I kind of take them down in volume a little bit just to kind of create that definition between the open hat, the offbeat hat, and those kind of skippy hats. So that's the first hat that's in there. That's kind of creating a lot of the groove. Next up, we have this kind of jacking snare. So I'm not quite sure how I got this. It originally came from a tops loop. So let's jump in and see that. Oh, so that is the top loop. So I've literally got a tops loop there that I've got from a sample pack, the Deep House and Garage pack from Sample Magic. It's a really good pack, that one. And I've just used a percussion loop. So it literally is just a snare loop within there. And that worked really, really well. That kind of just sat in the track really nicely. And then I've got another jacking snare within there. So as you can see there, I've got this top loop there, but there's only a snare happening from it. That's because I have the automation within the clip. So there's a lot of stuff going on within here. We've got a hi-hat within there, we've got a clap in there, but I'm using this one single snare hit from that clip. So that's generally how I use top loops. I'll listen to the top loop along with the rest of my track, as you can do with Ableton, and I'll just think, oh, that snare will work. I don't want anything else in that clip. Don't want the hat, don't want the clap, don't want anything else, but that individual snare hit really works well. And that's what I've done here. So what I've done is I've actually taken that tops loop. You can see all the information in there. And in fact, if I consolidate this, so if I get rid of everything else within that clip, you'll see it is literally just that snare. So that is all that we're actually hearing. If I undo that, you'll see that that's the original clip. So that's generally how I use kind of tops loop. I'll kind of listen to it and I'll hear something in that tops loop that I'll use. So that's the other jacking snare within there. We've got a main hat. So again, I've gone over this before. This is a kind of more sloshy kind of hat. I call it a sloshy hat, and I've actually seen a few other producers that call it sloshy hats as well. So it's nice to know that I'm not alone with that. So that's a kind of sloshy kind of sound. That's what kind of gives my tracks its kind of real movement. It kind of gives it that housiness. And that's kind of, again, I think that might just be a hat loop that I originally took from. Anyway, that's a hat. That's the kind of main hat within there. Next up, we've got a couple of claps. Now, I've actually labeled them as claps, but I've actually been looking over these, and they're actually snares, again from tops loops. So as you can see there, I've got a loop there that it's got something there, it's got a hi-hat, but there's actually a snare going on there, and that's the only thing I've taken from that loop. And if I go down to this loop as well, yep, so I've done exactly the same with this loop. So we've got well, it's a bit more of a fragmented loop, but I've just used this snare at the end here. That's the only one that I kind of really liked with that tops loop. So yeah, that's how I've got those. So if I put them all together, you'll kind of hear that they all kind of just work together. I've just kind of layered it up until I've got that sound that I wanted. Now Now, as I mentioned with the hats, I've got my own swing going on there, which I started with the hats. Now, obviously, if you're using top loops, they will all have their own type of swing. So trying to find those loops that fit with the swing that you've already got can be quite tricky. Obviously, you can edit them up to make them give them more swing, you know, so it fits in with your track. But sometimes it actually works quite nicely if they're not exactly the same amount of swing. It can kind of give that human kind of feel where we're not quite as robotic to have everything happening right at the same time. We might be a bit slow or it might be a bit fast. It gives that human kind of nature. So that's why kind of mixing up your swings just slightly can kind of give that human kind of approach. So it kind of worked in this track. Sometimes it won't work and you need to kind of just chuck away those samples that don't work and use something else, or, you know, manipulate them a little bit. But yeah, that's kind of how I do that. And finally, we've got a fill in there. So again, the fill is just a snare. So we've just got a snare within here. Yeah, just a simple snare. And again, I've used the same swing. Yeah, so swing 70 there. And I've just created a little kind of, you can see there, just a little kind of fill. Just a really, really kind of simple fill. Just something to kind of make the track move along a little bit. And it just kind of all works together. So with the music, the kick and the drums, we've pretty much got a track going there. So that's kind of how the track started out. I started with the melody and the bass and then built the drums around that. And that's kind of how I kind of started it. I would have had it as a loop. But before I kind of made it into a track, I knew I needed a vocal of some sort. Now, I usually turn to Splice for my samples because you can search by key on there. And that's really good when you've kind of got a melody and everything else like that sorted, but you then need to get vocals or whatever else you need to for the track. So by looking at the bass, for example, bass is always a really kind of good place to look because that usually contains your dominant kind of notes, the kind of key of your track. And with this, I kind of knew that it was probably B. I knew the track was probably in B, so that's what I'd be then searching for. And I knew the chords that I was using were minor. So I was looking for a kind of B minor kind of vocal. And that's what I was kind of just looking through. Now, obviously, looking through samples on Splice or anywhere can take you a large amount of time. And I really have no idea how long I was actually looking for those vocal samples. But I did manage to find something in the end. So I actually had the vocal sample within here that I've kind of cut up a little bit. So if I jump into here, hopefully we can actually find out where the original sample came from. So the original sample was from a pack called Femme Fatale Vocal Hooks. And I actually downloaded a couple of samples, but I think I only used one of them. So this is how it sounded originally.
Some tender love from you, baby. Been so long. Why you keeping me waiting?
So it really, you can already hear that, like, I started off with the All I Want.
All I want. Why you keeping me waiting?
So that's kind of the two different parts that I kind of spotted from there. I also got a different sample as well. Let's see if we can find this one. This is from a different, no, it's from the same pack, but a different folder. So that's the kind of, yeah, so you can already hear these are the kind of stabs that I've kind of built it up around. And if I kind of play back all of these together, you'll kind of see how I kind of comped these all together. Oh, and then we just got a random one on the end there. I don't know where that one's from. Let's have a look at where that one's from. Oh, this is from another, just a random, in fact, this is from a Chill Out sample CD. So again, this is one of the great things about Splice, the fact that you can just say, right, okay, I want vocal samples, female vocal samples in the key of B minor, and it shows you a whole load of stuff. And if you don't include any genres in there, you can look across genres and find some really interesting stuff. So that one was straight out of maybe, I don't know, it's a chill out one, so maybe it was kind of a down tempo kind of trip hop kind of thing, maybe. I have no idea, but it kind of worked in this track, and I kind of heard something in it. So when I'm kind of listening to these samples, I kind of just hear how I can cut them up and play around with them. Exactly the same how I do the top loops. I'm kind of listening out to samples and seeing how they might fit in with the track. So yeah, that's kind of how I kind of comped all those vocals together. They're all also obviously kind of all mixed together, so they're all kind of roughly the same volume, and then I've grouped them up together to kind of put all the effects on. I don't think there's any effects on individual channels. I can have a look, see if there's anything in there. Got a little bit of EQ on each one of them. A little bit of reverb as well. I'm not quite sure why I've put the same reverb on all of them rather than the group channel. It might have just been something I was doing when I was kind of working away. But on the group channel we have a compressor in there, so it's not actually used for sidechain. I think probably the compressor is just to kind of glue them all together and make them all kind of the same volume. I've got then a little bit of delay in there, just a tiny little bit of delay, just to kind of, yeah, just make it merge in with the rest of the track. LFOTool again, not as extreme as the other one, so it's not ducking it as much. Then we got a little bit of reverb. Now the reverb on here is something that I'm automating, so we've got the dry and wet, and then we've also got an imager on there. This is just making it a little bit wider. In fact, I don't actually have anything set up for this, so I might have tried something and then reset it, so I'm not quite sure why that's in there. But yeah, so that's how the vocals are all sitting, and this is kind of how it all fit together. So that's kind of how all the elements were, and I probably started with the loop from there, and then I went to arrange it. And the arrangement is pretty much kind of usually what I do with most of my stuff. So we have, you know, the usual 1 minute intro or so, something like that, about 1 minute. Goes into the track, introduces the vocal, and then we've got a little bit of a breakdown, so the small breakdown. Again, as I say, it's all about those kind of held notes. So I'm playing between those kind of held notes in the breakdown and then the more choppier notes throughout the actual track, just to kind of create some movement. So you kind of almost have a relax, a kind of chill out in the kind of breakdown, and then you're straight back into it again. You're kind of giving a bit of respite. But one of the interesting things that I like doing at the end of this breakdown was putting a bit of breakbeat in there. So I like kind of, I don't always like to just stick to 4/4. I like to kind of break that up sometimes with a bit of breakbeat or kind of garage kind of drums, just to kind of create that change of momentum almost. So at the end of this breakdown, where you think the kick's going to come straight back in again with a 4/4, I kind of drop into a kind of a two-step kind of pattern. So I've kind of stripped away the drums a little bit. I've kind of got rid of one of the jacking snares and the main kind of sloshy hi-hat. The sloshy hi-hat really kind of makes it, that give it that kind of house drive. So I've kind of taken that back, and I've just used the very delicate kind of skippy hi-hats to kind of give that kind of garage kind of flair. So yeah, that's kind of that's one of my favorite bits of the track, because just when you think it's going to hit into a house beat, it kind of drops into a kind of bit of garage and then back into the house beat again. So it kind of goes quite smoothly between the two. And then we got the breakdown, which is kind of just a general kind of normal kind of Dirty Secrets breakdown. I kind of really strip it back, so we've just got the kick going on there with very little kind of stabs and things like that, and then we kind of loop the vocal up to kind of create that crescendo, that kind of build up before everything comes back in again. So as you can see there, the reverb is kind of going up on the vocals, making them, as it's gone over 50%, it's kind of taken away some of the dry and you've just got the wet in there. So it kind of makes it sound very, trying to think of what the word is, but it just kind of brings it back. It puts it further away from you and then it comes right back in again when you kind of bring that dry back in again. It works really well and it's something I do a lot of the time on my breakdowns. And then also we've got the kick in there as well, my standard kind of just thumping kick. Just rather than doing like a snare build, I've done a kick build instead. And then when everything comes back in again, just to kind of shake things up a little bit more, I've got none of the drums in there. So I've just got the kick in there, the Rhodes, the bass, and it kind of just, yeah, it just gives you something that you're not quite expecting. One tiny little thing in there as well, and if you watched any of my breakdowns or any of my other track videos, you'll notice that I usually use quite a lot of kind of vocal samples as percussion almost. So I kind of punctuate a lot of the drums with vocal beatbox sounds or things like that. That kind of, I don't know, it kind of brings a human element to the drums, and that's why I've got this kind of male kind of vocal here. It's just something really small and random that I kind of found, but it kind of works. And as I say, I kind of just put it in there in a kind of, I think I was probably auditioning the sound and it kind of fit in right in those kind of places. So yeah, it's one of those things I just kind of chuck in just to kind of layer stuff up. So there's more interesting stuff going on. So that's pretty much the whole track. That's kind of how it came about. I think it was literally Velvet that I was kind of starting around. I was playing around with Velvet, seeing what sounds I could get out of it, what chords I could use. And it kind of all got formed around that. And then like the things like the skippy hi-hat, for example, that kind of gave the whole track its swing. So I kind of went on from there and it kind of became this more groovier track rather than a full-on kind of club banger or whatever. It was just kind of little bits like that that kind of inspired the whole track, and that vocal just kind of literally came in at the last minute. I had everything in the track already and I just kind of found that vocal and it just kind of worked. So yeah, that's kind of how the whole track came together. It was just playing around and seeing what I could come up with. If you've seen any of these track deconstructions before, you'll see that that's pretty much how I do most of my tracks. It's all just playing around and seeing what I can come up with. If you do like the track and want to grab a copy, there's a link in the description below. So hit that, you'll be able to get hold of a copy and support me, which would be awesome. Also, check out that compilation, the Garage House Volume 3. It's a really, really good compilation. So definitely check that out. So hopefully this has been useful. Hopefully you've learned something from this. If it has, please give the video a like, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and hit the notification icon so you're notified whenever I upload a brand new video. As I say, I've got a whole load of videos like this on my channel, a load of track deconstructions and different tutorials and things like that. So definitely check out the channel, and hopefully I'll see you again in the next video.
All I want, why you keep